Welcome, I'm Jason Gilbert, JGilbo11. With me is Justin Elick at Big Italy 42. Taking a look at some stacks that you are liking for week 6. Kind of some high price ones, but I think with the team totals and the spots that they're in, it definitely can justify the price tag.
Yeah, I mean, this first one, obviously, it's one that we talk about most weeks here. Of course, the Steelers, we saw last week. It's never a matter of just one guy going off. I mean, Roethlisberger had 4 touchdowns. Sammy Coates had a big game with a couple scores. Antonio Brown scores because he always does. Le'Veon Bell had almost 100 yards receiving. I think 150 all-purpose yards roughly. So, I mean, this one's just it's kind of a no-brainer. Dolphins are not a good defense. This is a defense that people had kind of, I won't say high hopes, but higher hopes for this season. But they've been really, really bad against number one wide receivers. They've been bad against the run. So, really the only thing that could slow this stack down is potentially some subpar weather that we might see this weekend. But that's not going to scare me off this team. This team can get it done in the short passing game. They can throw it down the field. They can do it all. And I think if you're playing multiple lineups and at least one of them is not a stack of Pittsburgh, then I think you're doing it wrong.
I think with the weather coming into play, I mean, maybe you just go Bell and Coates. I think maybe you can go so many different options with this team. So, you get exposure to it still, but you do save some cash if you don't want to go full overboard because of the weather.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, you definitely want to get yourself some pieces of that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Steelers are, one of the higher totals of the weekend. And with those guys, I mean, they're just tremendous plays. Top stack number 2, you're looking at the Panthers, who are going to get Cam Newton back this week. Most likely, I think he's still in protocol, but practicing or something.
Practiced what, 3 days in a row he's practiced, so it seems like he should be good to go.
He was rolling around on this weekend like on a scooter without a helmet, so I mean, I think he's fine.
I mean, he had a concussion. He didn't know any better. I saw that. That was the first thing I thought of. Everyone's like, "What's he thinking?" Well, he's probably not thinking because his brain is bruised. Right? He thought he was in a car. And he wasn't. So he's over there trying to put his seatbelt on a scooter.
Oh, this is a weird Uber.
Yeah. Seriously, who's driving this thing?
But all jokes aside, I mean, anyone going up against the Saints defense is going to be a tremendous stacking option.
Yeah, I mean, our optimizer loves Cam Newton, and for good reason. Anytime you're facing the Saints, unless you're the Giants, apparently, then you're just in a really great spot. And, we saw Greg Olsen last week. Kind of more so it seemed like to me more of Derek Anderson struggling and just the fact that he's just a bad quarterback, the fact that he just force-fed Greg Olsen, but they couldn't stop him anyway. He had a huge game. He's still one of my favorite tight end targets regardless of the matchup because he's got such a great rapport with both these quarterbacks. He's just a big, reliable target. And we've seen before, if they're down late in the game, 2 guy. If they're in the red zone, he's a go-to guy. He's just always kind of the number 1 receiver. And I know Kelvin Benjamin is technically the number 1 receiver, but in my book, it is Greg Olsen. So, that Olsen, Cam Newton stack looks really nice. Jonathan Stewart's supposed to be back. I haven't seen anything about him potentially, having a reduced workload, but we did see Cameron Artis-Payne last week look good. Fozzie Whitaker a couple weeks ago looks pretty good. So I think that's definitely more of a GPP play than anything. I wouldn't probably play him in cash games for those reasons, but stacking these other guys, Kelvin Benjamin's the one that seems like he's kind of on the fence about playing this week. Still limited in practice late in the week. So monitor his status. But for me, it's definitely Newton, Olsen, and maybe throw Benjamin in there as well if he goes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, say Benjamin does sit, you could make kind of a pivot to like an opposing wide receiver 1 and use like a Cooks at a similar price and kind of get that game stack in there.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, Cooks is a guy that we are both on this week, and we'll talk about him in the DraftKings pod. But yeah, it's this game almost certainly is going to see, 48, 60 points somewhere in that range.
Yeah, it's the only one over 50 for a game total this week, and as we've seen games inside New Orleans, it's just a shootout.
Yeah, I would never in my life bet the under on this game. Not a chance.
In terms of value here, you got the Seahawks take on the Falcons at home. You look at the Seahawks. Great prices on DraftKings. I still think they're solid on FanDuel, but DK is really where you have the value here.
Yeah, I mean, Russell Wilson at 6,900. I know you can get quite a few quarterbacks for, cheaper that are viable options, of course. But Wilson finally, not last week, they're off last week, but 2 weeks ago, Had a Russell Wilson type game, hadn't had more than one touchdown pass in a game, hadn't had over 300 yards, went for over 303 touchdowns in that game. Obviously, we mentioned in the other pod about potential bad weather in this game, but Jimmy Graham coming off back-to-back 100-yard games. Christian Michael looks really good right now, too. Doug Baldwin's the guy that I like in tournaments as well, especially if people are off him because of the weather. So, if you see big-time wins, that's not going to stop you from getting the ball in the red zone, throwing a short pass from the 10-yard line for a touchdown to Doug Baldwin. So I think that we're going to see lower and lower ownership for guys like Doug Baldwin, maybe even Jimmy Graham and Russell Wilson as the weekend goes on. So I definitely think that this is a pretty viable stack with upside, and I'm almost more excited to play it with the weather.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, when you look, this is kind of relates to the Steelers. It's like you can still use two guys. I mean, you can use Michael and Graham at their prices if the weather gets bad because, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of appeal away from them.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, if anything, it's just going to be kind of that perception that you come off of these guys because of poor weather. But I mean, it's not like these guys haven't played in weather before. I mean, this is a team that's
Seattle.
I mean, yeah, most of their games are in poor weather. So obviously it's hard to account for 30-mile-an-hour winds or whatever it might be. But, this isn't something new. It's not like they're not going to warm up. They're not just going to show up on the field and say, well, let's figure it out. So I think it's a really, really interesting option now this week.
Yeah, and contrarian stack, it should be titled Homer Stack, taking on Cincinnati here.
See, yeah, and with that, obviously it seems like a homer call, but I'm not sitting here predicting they're going to win the game, and that's all the more reason why I like this stack. Obviously, I hope that they win the game, and if they don't, and probably when they don't win, hopefully they fire Marvin Lewis. They won't, but you expect they're going to be down, biggest underdogs on the slate. I think they lost by 26 points, the Patriots last time they played them. So this is a game that they probably should and probably will lose, but that's good news for guys like Giovanni Bernard in particular, especially on DraftKings with the full PPR, sitting there at $4,600. When this team gets down, I mean, and Dalton doesn't have his other safety blanket in Tyler Eifert, who, as of this morning, officially out for this weekend. So it's Giovanni Bernard underneath and CJ Uzama, I guess, but you can't really rely on him. He's not going to see high volume. It's going to be Gio when they're down. It's going to be AJ Green when they can get the ball to him. And, I mean, there's really no one else you rely on. Brandon LaFell lucked his way into 2 late touchdowns last week. Wasn't a particularly good performance by him anyway, so I'm not overreacting to that. I think these 3 guys, you stack all 3 of them in a tournament, you almost hope that the Bengals get down big early, and then they just throw the ball 50-plus times. And Dalton hasn't found the end zone a lot, only 5 touchdown passes this year, including the 2 last week. But, I mean, he's 3rd in the league in passing yards. So those numbers are going to even out eventually. So I'm banking on him scoring a couple of times this week.
And that Dalton DraftKings price tag at $5,500 is really cheap. I mean, same with Bernard across both sites. I mean, obviously, AJ Green you expect to be expensive. So in terms of contrarian stack, I mean, you have the ownerships here less than 5%. I completely agree. I don't think people are really looking at that game in terms of game flow, maybe outside of Bernard, but not really the full game stack.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, even if things, say it's a close game till late in the game here, Jeremy Hill's banged up. You don't expect that he's going to see a full workload either way. So Gio, not likely to see much running room, but still going to be a big part of the offense. Obviously, AJ Green's going to see a ton of targets regardless. I mean, there's just no one else in that offense that you can rely on. So I think regardless of game flow, I think this is a good stack, but especially if they get down a couple scores early.
Yeah, certainly. So that's going to wrap it up with the stacking to win it for week 6. Be sure to head on over to dailyfantasycafe.com, check out our great tools and content.